I've had many people ask me how I got involved in this mess that I'm in now, and the reason that my family and I got involved with the communist court system in Judge Mary Iran is because in November of 2008, I asked my husband Ken for a divorce after suffering years of abuse. The abuse was not only against me, but also against his own daughter, but more savagely upon my 2 minor children from a previous relationship. The abuse got to the point that I could no longer stand by and allow it to happen. I had to get us out of that situation, so after a really hideous fight just before Thanksgiving, I told Ken that I wanted a divorce. He then proceeds to tell me that the children and I, including his own 5-year-old daughter, had until December 31st to be out of the house that we were living in. And since he was such a controlling person, he made sure when we moved in, only his name was on the lease and not mine, his own wife. He told us that he had the right to evict us because his name only was on the lease, and that he had contacted the owner to inform him that I was no longer allowed on the premises after December 31st. When I asked him where he planned for us to go, he stated that he didn't care if we lived in a cardboard box, just so long as we were out of the house. This is typical of the type of controlling, sadistic character that he is, which is to inflict pain upon others and take joy in knowing that they will suffer, but he will end their suffering if they come crawling back to him. To show how controlling and mentally disturbed of a person he is, he even chose to go down Christmas Eve to have the divorce paperwork filed. Not only that, but he had removed all the money out of our saving and checkings account that again he controlled and had access to, which left me without any money for even food for my children or money to find a place to live. He told me when I learned how to be an obedient woman and do as he told, he may allow the children and I to move back into his home, but stricter conditions would be put into place. I asked what type of conditions, and he told me I was no longer allowed to have a cell phone. I would have to learn how to cook special meals for him, but that the children and I could just eat macaroni and cheese. I was no longer allowed to go over to my friend's house without a curfew, and the children would only receive clothes on their birthdays, so they better make them last. Soap and shampoo would be rationed as the little brats used too much of it already, and several other ridiculous, inhumane things you wouldn't even do to an animal he was trying to do to my children and I. He told me that he would control all money coming into the household, even if it was money that I myself had earned at my job, and that I would no longer be able to question him on what he spent it on or how much he was spending. It wasn't much different from the way we were already living with the tyrant that my children refer to as Kenneth the Hun. Since he himself abused them by degrading them with names like bitch, emo, retard, and anything else he could call them in his daily exercise of what he called making them stronger adults for the real world, when he himself lived in his comic book fantasy world from the comic book store that he owned. When my son was only 12 or 13, one of Ken's 20 or 200 plus nude comic books that he had displayed in the hallway, literally a foot away from my children's bedroom, had fallen into his hands and was left in our bathroom. Ken had thrown a fit, throwing shoes and items at my son, hitting him and telling him if he ever touched his precious comic books again, he would kick his ass out of the house. Then Ken and I got into it, as I had told him on several occasions to remove those and the other pornographic material from our home and put it into the storage unit with the other thousands of comic books he had in boxes. I told him pornographic and erotica artwork didn't belong in the home with our minor children, and he said he didn't care. I told him he should be more concerned with my 12-year-old son viewing this rather than his stupid magazines getting ruined. But again, this was par for the course of Ken, as he only thought of himself and no one else. More proof on how Ken loved to inflict pain upon people? He contacted me ahead of time by text to taunt me and inform me that he had a Christmas gift for me and that I was going to love what he was giving me. He also told me that he was going to have his roommate, or I should say our roommate, who is a convicted felon, deliver it to me on Christmas Day. This was on Christmas Eve that he did this, and at that point I was already at my parents' house with the children. On Christmas Day I called our roommate to ask him what it was that Ken had wanted to give me, and Lee responded that he was not going to tell me because it was too mean and cruel to mention, and that he was not about to ruin my Christmas. This surprised me, since Lee is a known convicted criminal with a domestic violence and drug charge history. The next day, when I went home to finish packing my children's and my belongings, Lee came to me and said, "Here," at which point he threw an envelope at me. and inside it contained the divorce papers that Ken had filed on Christmas Eve. Lee then said, "See, I told you that you wouldn't want the gift that Ken wanted to give you yesterday." And again, this is typical of the type of mental and emotional abuse that my children and I had to endure while I was married to him. When December 31st came around, I still had no idea where the children and I were going to be staying. It was Ken's brilliant idea to have me move in with my parents in their 2-bedroom apartment with 5 people already staying there. I was seriously considering on sleeping in my car with my children when a good friend of mine suggested that I come and stay with him. He said just until I got back on my feet I could stay with him. At first I told him no, but the more I thought about it, the more I came to the conclusion that it would be the best solution for the time being. Besides, my children had known him for over 4 years and liked him already, so I did not think that there would be any problems. However, I was wrong. There were problems, because the minute that Ken found out we were staying, he became enraged. Because his controlling plan of evicting myself and the children with no place to go except to come crawling back to him with this new set of punishing rules didn't work. He started harassing me with belligerent emails, text messages, and cussing and threatening phone calls. See, in Ken's warped mind, when he kicked the children and me out of the house, he thought he was making things terrible for me and that I would come crawling back to him, begging him to take me back and apologizing for asking for a divorce. That was never going to happen. I was not about to allow him to abuse my children and I any longer. Then Ken cooked up the scheme to try to take my daughter away from me by using my photography business against me. However, when he brought this up in court and he was told that I was doing nothing wrong and that I was not putting our 5-year-old daughter in danger, it enraged him so much that he then began scheming other ways to take my daughter from me, to hurt me and punish me. He learned through interrogation of both my 14-year-old and my 5-year-old daughters that my friend and I were starting to date. So he then decided that he was going to make false allegations against my friend to be able to take my 5-year-old daughter away from me. He called the Santa Clara Police Department to file false reports. However, after their investigation, they had found that no crime had occurred and closed the case. Again, Ken became so enraged that he then filed a report with the San Jose Police Department and had one of his criminal drug addict friends file a report with CPS with the same false allegations. While these cases were being investigated, Ken filed paperwork with the courts for an emergency screening and a false restraining order filed against my fiancé that was later dismissed by a judge. And thus began my insane fight, not only with Ken and his psychosis, but also with the prejudiced and biased Judge Mary Oran and her partner in crime against Americans, Kimberly Nielsen, who does not believe innocent until proven guilty. Of course, when CPS and the San Jose Police Department did their investigations, they too found that the frivolous, irrelevant, false allegations that Ken was bringing against my now fiancé were unfounded and not true. So again, they helped to prove his innocence. However, Judge Mary Oran and her worthless therapist, Kimberly Nielsen, chose instead to listen to Ken's lies and the lies that were being told to her by his drug addict criminal roommates, but not bothering to speak to any of my family members or my witnesses. Mary Oran and her flunky cohort, Kimberly Nielsen, forced my children and I to once again be homeless, only this time I did not have my car to sleep in. So the children and I were forced to move in with my parents instead of being able to stay in the safety of our own home where we had our own beds. Now we had to take turns getting what little sleep we can on a hardwood floor, in reclining chairs, or on a broken down couch, all trying to sleep in the same 10 by 10 room, just a couple of feet bigger than a prison cell, or so I've been told by a friend. I have tried going back to the courts with proof of our innocence once again, though in the meantime Ken had filed another emergency screening on me. The day of his filing, we were in court with all of this paperwork in hand, ready to close this case once and for all. But the communist Judge Mary Oran decided that instead of hearing the truth that day, she would elect to have the emergency screening heard in another 4 days, because they were able to extort another $650 from us. Ken's accusations now were that my fiancé had been in the presence of my daughter when I was served papers by his drug and violent spousal abusive roommate. When my fiancé debunked their lies by showing proof that he was clear across town and at work, with proof of his time card and his boss confirming that he was at his job at the time, they claimed he was at home. The judge simply put the paperwork aside and said, We will continue this with the emergency hearing instead. Now, what judge is going to have proof of flat-out lies in front of her and choose to ignore it? The communist Judge Mary Arand did. In an attempt to be able to return back to the safety of my own home, I even had proof of my fiancé's innocence and that we had been abiding by all the rulings that the Hitler communist judge placed on us. But because of her prejudice and bias, it was all ignored. She refuses to see or act upon the truth that is being set in front of her. All she cares about is the money that she is extorting from us so that she and her therapist can live their happy, lavish lifestyles. They could care less about the truth or the lives that they are destroying. We are pleading with anyone that has an ounce of decency or common sense out there to listen to this and help us to petition to remove this Hitler's sister's Judge Mary Arand from the American court system and have her brought up on charges and sentenced for the wrong she is doing and the crime she is committing against us, the American people. When the people who are supposed to uphold the law break it, they too become criminals and need to pay the time for their crime. Judge Mary Arand has dishonored the title of Your Honor and needs to be treated like the criminal that she is. So please, by all means, help us. Thank you.